Ballet dancers, welcome back to Broche Banter. I'm Julie, your host. This week we get to talk to Holly, a self-taught artist and adult ballet dancer. At the time of this episode, she was training to go on pointe, and since then she has actually been approved and accepted into my beginner pointe cohort. Congratulations, Holly, on all of your hard work. In this episode, we chat about something we all know very well, the taste gap. The gap between where we are and where we want to be. It can be highly frustrating to learn something as hard as ballet. Join us to find out how Holly utilizes challenges like frustration and confusion to actually boost her process in ballet and in her own art. This episode encourages us to leave our comfort zone and embrace perfection. It's a wonderful reminder that showing up is a win in and of itself. Holly is also actually a really incredible artist, and I'll have the link to all of her art in the show notes as well. So with that, I hope you enjoy this fabulous episode with Holly. Welcome, Holly. It's so great to have you on the show. Thanks for being here today.
Thank you for having me.
I'm really excited to chat with you today. We have a lot to talk about as far as art goes. You're both a ballet dancer. You started as an adult, and also you're a full-time artist. So we have a lot to talk about the similarities, differences, and everything between ballet and everything else you create in your life. So tell me about, we'll talk about the ballet in a sec, but what is your art? What is your art that you work on full-time?
So I'm kind of unusual because I'm a self-taught artist. So I didn't go to art school. I basically started out making stuff as a hobby and ended up being able to kind of teach myself something unique that enabled me to make the jump to selling in galleries and things like that. So I'm
Oh,
sort of an unusual artist in the sense that, like, I can't paint, I can't draw. Please don't ask me about color theory, um, and all these things that you're expected to know. But I sort of, through experience, taught myself enough how to do it almost accidentally to make the leap. So I do mixed media textiles. So I basically make 3D textiles with found objects, with threads, with repurposed antique supplies that tell narrative stories about like women or disappearing places. It's very unusual. It's not like I went out and became a painter.
yeah. And you have your work in galleries, you sell your art, and this is your career, basically a self-taught artist, and this turned into your career.
Yeah, and it was my hobby for a long time, and I thought maybe if I could sell a couple things, I could pay for my framing, and
Yeah.
that would be nice because then I could make more things and feel less guilty. And it sort of got away from me and became a whole other thing. But I also feel like I'm always learning because I didn't go to art school. Every time I do something, it's usually the first time when I do a new thing. So someone says, "Oh, do you want to do a solo show for the first time?" And I think, "Yeah, that's great." And I sign the contract, and then I think, "Okay, now we get to figure out how to do this."
Right. That sounds like entrepreneurship.
Yes, basically.
That sounds very familiar. So you started ballet around the time you went full-time as an artist?
I got really serious about ballet, I think, around the time I went full time, in part because a bunch of artists told me that if your hobby becomes your job, you have to find another hobby to get serious about or you will go nuts. And I
Totally.
was getting more serious about it anyway. So that's when I started showing up in class 6 days a week and,
Yeah.
really sort of digging into it at that point because I thought, well, I love this. Now this can be my serious hobby. Now that
Yeah.
this thing has become my work.
Mhm. Okay, so this is all pretty recent.
Yeah, this was all essentially the first COVID lockdown.
Yeah.
I was working a job where my contract got pulled. And, I said, well, what am I going to do with my time? I was lucky I had savings and stuff.
Yeah.
But my husband, who's a great supportive guy, said, well, you always said if you could just make enough pieces for a portfolio, you could do this. You've got time. Go do it. Go see what happens. And by the time the whole world went back to normal, I had a whole different job. I didn't have to go back to my old job. It was great. I hated my old job. So this was a big bonus.
Yeah, that's amazing. Okay, so when you have time though, sometimes that time is a blessing and a curse when you just are gifted all day, every day for the foreseeable future. Did you sort of have, blank canvas syndrome where you look at an open thing and you're just like, oh my God, what do I make? Or like, how was that process for you?
I got lucky in the sense that I had a bunch of crazy projects in mind, and I actually went through there's almost like a textile associates program in the UK,
Oh,
and it's meant to transition. It's a year long, and it's meant to transition basically hobby artists to professionals. And
Wow.
it's not like art school. They don't teach you how to make art, but they teach you a little bit of the business skills. And by the end, you're supposed to have a portfolio. So I had these crazy projects and I was constantly going to the tutors and they kept saying, well, you can do this, but you don't have to, right? You know, you can pass if you don't do this. And I said, yeah, but I think I can do these crazy things. And some of those early things I made turned into long running series where I've sold a ton of pieces of them.
Yeah.
But they were just kind of passion projects that I didn't know if any, you know, if they were marketable or not. I had no idea what was marketable. I'd never sold anything.
Yeah. Well, and even when you've sold something, the idea of what's marketable, the market's always changing, right? And your ideas are always changing and shifting. So it is kind of a moving target in a sense.
Yeah, one of the things I've learned is that anytime I make something because I think, oh, there's a show, there's a theme, I'll make something that's guaranteed to sell. It never sells. I sit on it for years now. Um, but whenever I make something that I think this, I would just love to make this weird thing, and if it doesn't sell, I'll hang it on my wall forever and be a happy person. All those things go,
Hmm.
which I think is really interesting.
Life lesson right there.
Yeah.
People can tell, like we talk about in artistry class all the time. People can tell when what you're doing is coming from the heart or if it's not. I don't know how they can tell. I honestly don't know what we all can see in each other, but like people can tell when the dancing when the dancing is from the heart. They can tell apparently when the textiles and the mixed media art is from the heart. How can they tell? I don't know what it is. Do you have a sense? Like, do you have a sense of what
No,
you're up on?
it's really funny because I see it at shows. Like I
Yeah.
make so one of the things I make is a series on 3D textile Mardi Gras floats, which were from watercolors that were made by anonymous female Mardi Gras designers in the early 1900s. I'm the only person in the world interested in this, I think, other than the people who made the Tulane archive of all the original art. But I made one for this program and I said, okay, I'll hang it on my wall. I have sold 7 to people who have never been to New Orleans, who have never been to Mardi Gras, have no idea what they're looking at, and have bought them at shows with very little exposure.
Yeah.
And I think they can tell that somehow I really like them
Yeah.
and that resonates with them or they feel very personal.
Hmm.
But I am also frequently I'm surprised by this because it's not like anyone has a cultural frame of reference for this, or even to some degree knows what they're looking at. Sometimes they just think it's a landscape in a funny shape,
Yeah.
which is fine if someone wants to buy it that way. But people can somehow sense that
Hmm.
this was the thing that I make because I think they're fun,
Yeah.
and I think that does almost project to people. You're right, just the way in artistry class, if you can just relax and dance, which is something I actually have a hard time with much of the time. But if you can just kind of breathe and relax and dance,
Yeah.
even if you're not perfectly turned out or whatever, you can still kind of say something to people.
And it's like if the goal is to say something to someone, you have to speak from the heart. You can't do it another way if the goal is to make art that resonates with people, whether it's dance or any other form. And it's like the same with music too. Like you can listen to a piece of music without any cultural context of when it was created, what the instruments are, why the person wrote it, and know that it touches you inside. Like you can know this without knowing anything about the music. It's just kind of funny how that works with art and with people and how it connects us together. You can know nothing about the person, the location, the why, how it's made, nothing, and you love it. You're like, this is it. This is it. I love it. Why? I don't know.
Yeah, and it's funny, the experience of seeing this in an art context has almost helped me. So for like Friday artistry classes, it's almost helped me relax a little bit. Like it's helped me think about how can I recreate that experience of just doing something that's fun and interesting for me and not making a list of how turned out I am or how straight my leg is or whatever, and
Yeah.
just sort of try and do something that's enjoyable for 40 minutes and turn off all the normal stuff I run through my head during, a bar class. And I feel like taking that experience from seeing how powerful that experience can be with other people, not just with my art, with other people's art. Sometimes you can see something in a gallery and they look like someone hit them in the face with a brick and then they buy it, even if they don't know what it is, because it said something to them. I think that's an amazing human experience that we can have in lots of different contexts. But seeing it sort of over and over at work made me try and want to find it in dance rather than, I mean, I still care about the technical part, but rather than only being someone who cared about the technical improvement.
Mm-hmm. So there's a lot to pick. That'll fill the next hour picking apart that statement you just made, because there's so much in there. There's so much in there to dig into. So it's really interesting when you think about these like sort of two modes of your brain, right? There's like the technical learning, like you kind of have to learn the particulars of what you're doing with your body or with the fabric or with whatever art medium. There's like the technical aspect of like how to use the medium. And then there's the artistic aspect of it, which is like how to say something with it. Like what is your take on those two aspects of it? How they come together, how they are separate? Are they the same? Are they two sides of the same coin? I'm curious what your take is on it, both from ballet and art, whichever you want, whichever side you come at.
Well, I think they kind of have the same problem, especially for adults who start. Like, I know some adults who start art by drawing boxes for a year or doing all these technical exercises, and then they quit because they're miserable, right?
Yeah,
Because
it's so
that's a
boring.
miserable experience. It's boring and you don't get to say anything and it's uncreative. But I also think ballet can be like that. There's a way which I used to approach it, I think, where I was like, I'm going to check the box, I'm going to check the goal. And I still have goals. Like, I really want to get on point. But it used to be like, well, I don't need to learn these head motions. Who cares? Like,
Right.
it's not a straighter leg, right? But the
Right.
head motions are what make it look nice and make it have feeling. And if you don't at least try, you're missing 50% of the experience. But it took
Yeah.
me a surprisingly long time to realize that, I feel like.
Well, and it's funny because in the same, like I love the analogy of like trying to draw a perfect box or like trying to draw a perfect circle, right? And it's like you are going to take years probably to be able to do that. And in the meantime, unless someone's forcing you to do it, you're just like, I don't see the purpose of this. Like, I am not going to be, it takes a few years in ballet at least to actually be able to straighten your legs and to actually be able to turn out your legs and to actually be able to stand up straight and to actually not drop your elbows and to actually point your feet. It takes
Right.
5 years for all of that to unfold, like if not more, depending on how often you're practicing. Like it, and so you're thinking for that whole period of time, you're expecting a person to stay motivated to work on this really detailed stuff without having any without seeing any real world application to it. Maybe it's possible, but for me, for many people, for most people I teach and have come in contact with, it's not. So it's really interesting to hear that it's withdrawing too.
But I think that's why a lot of people quit, both ballet and art. I think a lot of people feel like, I want to get really good. I want to get really good as fast as I can. And there isn't a shortcut process to it. And then they get mad and then they quit.
That's so
And it's
accurate.
because they haven't figured out how to enjoy the learning process, which just feels frustrating rather than something that's enjoyable and where there are these small progress markers.
Mm-hmm. And in the sense where, like you said, enjoying the learning process, if you're having fun, you care less about the goals and you care less about when you hit them. And then they end up ironically coming. Like you were saying, when you relax into it, like it tends to work better. And it's like, yeah, if you're obsessed over that perfection of that box, it's going to take you 3 years. And if you have fun with the box and you keep working on it, it's going to take you 3 years. So either way, it's going to take you 3 years to
Right.
draw the box. So you might as well have some fun with it in the meantime.
And you always dance better when you remember to breathe. That
That's
seems
true.
like one of those universal things. If you can relax enough to remember to breathe, it will always be better.
Yeah, because it means your brain, like you were saying, you had mentioned just offhand that it's like you need to quiet the normal kind of chatter in the brain in order to channel like your artistic vision through. It's like the same when you're working with your technical stuff. It's like if your brain is so busy that you can't breathe, then you're not absorbing the information into your body.
Yeah.
Okay, so the learning process is frustrating. Let's uh talk about that. Was it frustrating? Is it frustrating in art? Is it still frustrating? What's different between that and learning ballet? Because you started ballet from scratch too. So you probably had a whole host of frustrations in ballet as well as with your art.
Yeah, it's funny. I came at ballet and art sort of with the same mindset. So I took a little bit as a teenager, but I was very curvy early and basically quit because I couldn't get cast in the Nutcracker
Oh,
very, very early. But almost the same way I came to art. Like, I don't really fit in art either. Like, I'm self-taught. I don't do a normal art form. So in some ways, I sort of came to both of these things as someone who didn't fit the mold, who wasn't kind of the normal person to be interested in it, and found out I was obviously very interested in both, which was kind of unusual. But I do really think that part of it was for both. It helped. I had done art as a hobby, so I had sort of my own process that I was pretty invested in. And I still use the same process, and now I just spend most of the time explaining it to people when I do shows in some way that kind of tries to make sense of it. And ballet obviously was harder because I didn't have that process to start with. I had to sort of find it, and it took a long time for me to get a routine that worked and something where I felt like I'd made progress, but I also wasn't just banging my head against the wall all the time and not seeing any progress on anything.
Right.
I
So
feel like I've got that now, but that's what, 2, 3 years in?
yeah, it takes a while for it all to unfold. It really does. Like even each piece, like you said, the process even takes a while to unfold and figuring out what you want to work on and all of that. So what did you end up coming to as your ballet process?
My ballet process now, I feel like I've made a lot of progress and it works for me, is essentially a combination of enough floor bar to work on flexibility and ab strength and that stuff. A lot of time in class to just repeat things and let my brain sort it out.
Mhm.
And then sort of a 20-minute a day pre-point routine because I do want to get on point for sort of a little bit of strengthening if the class that day doesn't hit it.
Yep.
Um, and that seems to be working for me, but it took me a long time to get there, to get to what wouldn't drive me crazy, to what would fit into my schedule. Um, but I also think I spend maybe more time dancing than some people because I don't have kids, like I just have dogs. I have more time in some ways. I work from home. I can sneak in a 20-minute pre-point as a work break in a way other people can't.
Right. Yeah, being at home or having a private office makes a big difference to being able to sneak things in here and there, or not having a commute also makes a big difference unless you can do your
Right.
in your shoes on the commute. So it sounds like you've had times when the schedule wasn't working for you and it did get kind of frustrating. What did you do in those periods? Did you push through? Did you take a break? Did you take a step back? Or like what were those periods like?
Well, like we just moved. I didn't do any live classes. We were moving. It was a mess. I have a friend actually who's another Broche student who was like my pre-point accountability buddy, and she texted me every day, and she
Oh,
just like texted me pre-point in all caps
oh my
at
God,
some
that's
point of the
amazing.
day. And our deal was like I had to sit down and do it. Like it didn't matter if I was packing the box, whatever. Like if she texted in all caps, I had to do it. So we made
That's
a deal.
amazing.
I'm very grateful to her for keeping me accountable. But that was really all I did. I did that and a couple longer floor bar classes, and that was it.
Yep.
Because my whole life was boxes. So I think keeping some kind of routine is important, but also knowing that you can come back to it. And I was really worried about losing progress and losing strength. And I feel like that has been okay. Like I still remembered how to balance when I came back, which was reassuring.
Well, and you were still in the mode. You're still in the mode, even if only 20 minutes a day.
Yeah, I think sometimes if you can just grab little bits, and again, art's like that too. If you can just like paint a flower for 20 minutes a day, you'll get better eventually. Like if that's the time you have in your life, that's the time you have in your life.
Mhm. So when you had your other career and you were making art as a hobby, is that how you did it, or did you have like a longer art routine too? Like what was that process like?
I That is how I did it. A lot of times I did 20 minutes on weekends. I would have more time sometimes and I would grab more time. But again, like I spend a lot of time on ballet,
Yep.
I was spending kind of, it's funny, I almost switched. Like I was spending the time I spend on ballet now on art. So that could be 90 minutes a day. I could probably squeeze in at that point. But I make very time consuming pieces. Like an 8 by 10 can take me 50 hours. So it took forever to make something because I make everything by hand. It's all layered, it's all 3D. And so I made like 2 pieces a year.
Yeah.
And now I make 12, 14. So it wasn't, the process was different, but having time has allowed me to speed up and produce enough stuff where I can actually have inventory most of the time.
Yeah. So when you think about you having started ballet, I guess a couple years ago now, in the beginning, like a lot of people get into ballet and it's just like a fire hose of information and they get overwhelmed. And at that point, there's kind of a fork in the road. What do you do at that point when you get in there and you're like, oh well, this is actually a lot. Like there's a lot going on here. What was that like early period like for you? Did you have any frustrations in those early periods? Did you have any challenges getting started? What was that like for you?
No, I just really liked it from the beginning. Now I feel like I was terrible, but I really liked it. I mean, there are days I still feel like I'm really terrible,
And that didn't
but I
bother you.
mostly
Like that didn't
acknowledge that I
bother
have
you too much.
no, like being terrible at it didn't bother me. Like I was okay with just sitting and being terrible with something.
Yeah.
Um and sort of figuring it out. And I enjoyed the process enough that I think that kept me going. It was almost harder during the middle stage where I did realize that I liked it enough to want to be good and maybe to go on point. And that has almost been more frustrating because now I'm like, well, now I actually have an idea of what good would look like and how much work would go into it. And that, I mean, in some ways, ignorance is bliss, I think, at the beginning. Um, so now I sort of think, okay, I have to learn all these things now, right? You got to learn 12 different things if you want to get a pair of point shoes. And they're all hard and they're all time consuming.
Right.
And they're all stuff you can't really rush because your body has to get stronger or your feet have to get stronger or become a different shape. And so that's the part where sometimes I'm like, oh, I wish there was just some cheat code sometimes to like get to the end of this. So I almost struggle more now that I have a better idea of what the process really looks like.
Hmm.
So
Did that same thing happen to you with your art?
it definitely did. Like I
Hmm.
didn't mind being bad at it, but then once I got better at it, I was like, no, wait, this doesn't look right. But
Yeah.
now I know it doesn't look right, but also I don't know how to fix it. Like now I look at something, I say, well, if this doesn't look right, I just know how to go in and fix this and make it right. But there was definitely a time where I hadn't invented a method to do that. So I would say, well, this doesn't look right. And I don't know why. And I don't understand why. It's just not right. And it bothers my brain. So, and obviously I've done this so much now that I don't, I can kind of creatively problem solve around those things. But I am not an advanced enough ballet dancer where I have that feeling. Or sometimes when I'm doing a combination, like I know something is not right. But if you said, okay, stop and tell me what was wrong, I couldn't tell you because I'm trying to think about 8 different things, but I can tell you that something didn't feel right about what I was doing.
Yeah, it's so true. It's so true. When you it's funny, almost I've heard it called the taste gap, like where your taste is greater than your ability, and that gap is very frustrating. Like that you're that's what I've heard described. That's how I've heard this described that I really
I've
appreciate.
never heard that, but that is really smart. I think that's really true, right? Because once you learn more, you have a better sense of what's good and what's bad, but you can't achieve it, right?
Right.
Especially in ballet, because sometimes your body just won't do it yet
Yeah.
or can't do it yet.
Yeah. And it's like, hold your core. And it's like, well, where's that?
Right. Or it's like turn out your leg more. You're like, I can't, my heel's as high up as it's gonna get today. Like that is what this is what I have. Even though you look at it, you're like, oh, this is pathetic. Come on.
Yeah.
I mean, but sometimes that's what you've got, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's so funny. I really find it fascinating to watch how, like, to just watch myself do different things and what I'm okay with being bad at, what I'm not okay with being bad at. Whereas, like, I've tried a few hobbies as an adult other than ballet, but jujitsu and singing be the two biggest ones. And jujitsu, I know nothing. I've never even watched a jujitsu match before. I just started because I heard it was good for your mind and for being peaceful. I'd never seen one before. So I have no clue what good or bad is. So then I had no care at all when I went to class if I was good or bad. I didn't even cross my mind if I did a good job that day. Didn't even matter. Like I went there, I did it, I got sweaty, I had a good time. That was literally all that mattered. And then when I started singing, because I've had years and years of musical training, I could hear immediately that what I was singing was not good. And I'm like, this is awful. I hate hearing this. I hate hearing this sound. Like that had a taste gap. And that was extremely frustrating. But like in jujitsu, I was terrible. I was probably the worst person they've ever seen walk into there. Like when I got my blue belt, they basically said that. It's like, I was like the worst possible person they've ever seen try it. But I didn't care
Did
at
you
all.
point your feet when
I
you
did.
fought people? Because
I
I
did.
could see
I
that being a
I
problem.
pointed my feet because you're supposed to flex your feet. I pointed my feet, and in ballet, you're supposed to be very light and lifted. And so everyone could flip me over, like, no problem, because I was so light. Like, I was used to pulling up, and you're supposed to be heavy. And so I was just like awful. I was awful at it, but like, no taste gap. There was zero taste gap at all because I did not know or care at all how good I was at it. And once I got my blue belt, I started to study a little bit more and started to get a taste gap. And I was like, oh, this is less fun now. Like, what is,
Yeah. For me, that's always the most frustrating stage. But one of the things I admire, particularly about your Instagram account, because you're a very good dancer. So I love that I can watch you dance and I think, well, if I worked really hard, maybe I could be like 70% as good as Julie. But I love then that you post your singing and you post the jujitsu stuff. I think if all adults on Instagram posted more videos of us learning or just being downright terrible at things in the
Yeah.
beginning, everyone would feel more comfortable. I think particularly social media focuses on this finished form of something that's pretty and perfect. And I love that you're just like, this is what I sang today. This is where it is. But
Yeah.
you can literally hear your progress over time as you post those videos on your account. And I think that's really important for your students too, because to see you learning and then be inspired to learn or just to come to class and be terrible, but at least you were there.
Yeah, just be terrible. Like I feel like, and especially like ballet teachers, no one wants to be imperfect. No one wants to look bad or like mess something up. It's like not fun. And especially if you're in the front of a class and you mess something up and make a mistake, it's not fun. But like I think it's important as a ballet teacher, especially when you're trying to teach people how to be perfect, that you show them that you are not perfect. Like I am not perfect. I go to singing and I am out of tune. And I go to jiu-jitsu and I've only ever won one match in 2 years. I'm that bad. Like we have 4 matches every class. So it's like, I don't know. It's okay to suck. It's okay to suck. Like at the beginning, it's okay.
Yeah, I do think that taste gap idea is super interesting. So, because you see so many students, how many people quit at the beginning versus how many people quit when they kind of get to that middle taste gap stage and they're like, oh man, this is work. I don't know.
Yeah, there's a few really big moments in the ballet journey that I see. So day one, people leave, right? So like day one, you see someone once, you never see them again. That's like an amount of people, especially when I had like cohorted beginner programs that I would teach every couple of months in my Denver studios. You get people who come in, we would start a class of, 8 and half would make it till the end of even a 3-week program. So you get like massive drop off from just the beginning. They're just like, okay, like, no, this is not like
They
enjoyable
say
at all.
this is all in French and it hurts and I'm going home.
Right, exactly. And I think there's ways to mitigate that. I think there's ways to improve it, but like there's a natural drop off in the beginning where people walk in and they're like, whoa, this is like a lot going on, right? Like there's a lot happening here. This is very intense. And there's, a good amount of people who start beginner programs and just don't, they're just like, whoa, this is going to take way more work than I thought it was going to take, right? So that's like kind of one big drop off point. But if you get people past that first day, if you can figure out how to get them past that first day, you have them for about 9 months. Like you have them for about
Interesting.
9 months. And after about 9 months to a year, they kind of like are bored at the beginner level at that point. But the next level up is like either you're going to get more complicated choreography or you're going to have to work on more complicated technique. The only way to go from beginner up is like either you get more challenged in your body or you get more challenged in your brain. And that next level is where you lose like a good amount of people at that point. And for an adult to be doing the same thing, to have a static period in their life for more than 9 months where they're available in their free time and nothing has changed is like also about the max you get somebody for the most part. And then if you get them past that and you get them to their point shoes, about half of them are like, whoa, this was supposed to be easier.
I was going to ask about that. How many people qualify for point, say, ow, this hurts. I didn't know I'd have to do so much work and then quit? Because I would think that would be not an insubstantial amount either.
It's a substantial amount.
Yeah.
It's a substantial amount. Maybe not quite half, but about maybe a third of people qualify for point and then are like, okay, by week 4, you can see who you're going to have left for the remaining weeks. After week 4,
Or they're just like, I didn't know I would have to get so much stronger to do this, even from what I did before. Okay, I
right.
don't know, right?
Right. So at that point, they understand why my application process is so rigorous because it's like, because point is like very hard. And if you can't do it, like you're just going to be completely discouraged. And like, I am more protective of people's hearts. I mean, I am protective of their bodies, yes, but like adults are generally pretty careful anyways. So like you get them to a good place and you teach them how to do it. They're pretty much like not messing around. Like they're pretty much being safe and careful, but you have to be careful with their hearts. When they get those point shoes, it was their like life dream. They work up to it and you tell them they're ready when they're not ready, or it's like they can't hack it. That's terrible. So you get people as ready as you can. You get them as ready as you can, and they get the point shoes. And then they're like, I think a lot of people assume that point is actually a little bit easier than demi point, which is I kind of used to as well because it's like, oh, well, you're just on top of the shoes. Like they're just kind of holding you up. Like maybe it's actually easier. Like it's hard to stay up on demi point. Maybe you could just hold yourself up on the shoes and like, maybe it's like not as hard, but then it's like, okay, this is like a whole new project. And then it's like not like your ballet project goes away. Like pointe is a separate whole project of like a whole separate type of classes because learning how to use the shoes is like its
Right.
thing. And then you're still doing ballet. You still are working on your pirouettes. You're still working on your port de bras. You're still doing all this stuff, right? So I think there's an amount of people who get there and they're like, oh my gosh, like,
Right. Because even if you get there, even if you have all the strength or whatever, you still have to learn how to dance,
yes,
both off point and on point, which
yes.
is a whole different big lifelong learning thing.
Yeah, it's a huge milestone. I see that as a big milestone. Getting on point is a big milestone. And then the first time that they start feeling comfortable to leave the bar is another big milestone because until someone really believes in themselves that they'll be able to let go of that bar, they're still not sure that point is for them. Like
Interesting.
they're like, I wanted to dance and I'm stuck holding on to my bar forever. Like, will I be able to actually dance? And that's like a question that I think is running through people's mind. And until I see them get their first balance, like in Su, then I feel like they have some doubt that they bring with them into class. And once you see them starting to let go, then it's like, okay, they know that this is in their future. But like until then, they almost don't know if they're made for point, if that makes sense. Even though they've made it that far and the evidence says they are, it's like they have this like, oh my God, am I going to be able
That
to
makes
do
it. It's funny. One of the first times I ever felt like, okay, maybe I can do this if I keep on it, was when I felt comfortable spinning. Not even that I could do a great pirouette, but just where I could spin and it didn't feel like a weird foreign feeling to my brain. My brain wasn't like, "What are you doing? This is dangerous. Like, don't do this."
Yeah.
And that to me seemed like a major milestone. Just where I felt like spinning felt kind of natural and normal and not odd.
Yeah, that's huge.
So, whether you can do a pirouette or whatever, I think for an adult brain, that's a major adjustment point, at least for mine.
Oh, major and a major. And if someone has vertigo, if they have any sort of spatial situations, if there's any sort of like, I mean, like me, could hate roller coasters and weird sensations and anything like that.
Me
So like,
too.
it,
I know my little lizard brain is like, this is not safe. Don't do it.
exactly. So as long as you have that like panic, like you get the point panic or the pirouette panic, as I call them, you get these P panics, and then it's just like, oh my God, I can't do this. That's a big thing. Like, I don't know if I'm cut out for this, is like a question that you'll have in your brain if your body is like rejecting these sensations.
That's really interesting. Yeah, I would imagine there are kind of set points where you see large numbers of people just kind of disappear, especially in a big studio program.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even with private students, you reach points where people are faced with a crossroads of like you've mastered one thing and it's time to take on a new thing. And it's like, do I want to take on the next thing? Like that is a big question I think that people often ask themselves. Like you're kind of mastering one thing and you're looking at the next thing. I don't know, maybe this has happened to you in ballet or maybe even in art too. It's like you kind of feel that you've mastered you're the beginner level, you're kind of done with it. You're ready for a new challenge. And then you look at the new challenge, you're like, oh my God, is this gonna be as hard as the last challenge? Like, am I ready for this? Like, do I have
Yeah.
me right now? Like, okay, let's go for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm always kind of, everyone teases me that I'm known for biting off way more than I can chew, both in ballet and at work. Everyone was like, why did you sign up for this? Are you nuts?
Yes.
But I feel like, for some people, maybe I think I am one of these people for better, for worse. They learn by being confused. I think that's why I'm okay with being bad at something, because I often feel like if I'm not confused or my brain isn't sorting through something, I'm not really learning. I will just
Mm,
tune something out and not really take it in. So I have learned that if I'm kind of sitting with that confusion or sorting through something really complicated, I'm actually learning faster than I am if I'm just doing the same thing over and over again. So I have learned that I would rather, like, I take the advanced class sometimes. I am not ready to keep up with the other students in the advanced class, but I will get there faster by going and trying than I will by practicing the beginner classes over and over until I feel ready.
right.
So I show up anyway, even though I know I'm not as good as other people in it and I look terrible. And that's okay because it's a learning experience for me. And I will get to that level faster if I just show up and am confused the whole time.
I think more people learn like that, Holly, than who are willing to learn like that. Because when it comes to starting in that advanced class, right? Like the one you come to on Thursdays is like pretty tough. It's one of the tougher classes that I teach, right? And I have people like you who ask, "Can I come?" And I say the same thing I said to you, like, "Come give it a try. It's fast. You're welcome to slow it down. You're welcome to mess it up. Like you're welcome to come and enjoy it." And people come once and don't come again. Or they come once and they're like, "Oh, that was too much." But you have come quite a bit, and you have come and you like, and now you're learning, you're keeping up, you know which side you're on, you can do the soutanues, you can stay up, you have improved through it because you've kept showing up and you like sat through it. So like the way you handled coming to that advanced class is different than a lot. They'll be like, "Oh my God, I wasn't ready yet. I have to go back. I have to go back." But you didn't pull back. You pushed through. You went through that moment. You didn't see it as a turnaround.
What's funny is you don't know, because sometimes on Thursdays I'm busy. I will do a recorded one too if I'm too busy for the live one on Thursdays, because I do feel like as a brain exercise, it's kind of the most valuable thing I do. And it makes all the other classes easier because it's not so fast. And as someone who is directionally challenged, because I'm majorly directionally challenged, it is really useful to try and sort out the directions, even if my technique is terrible. I mean, just that alone has been invaluable for my brain. But you do have to be okay with knowing that you aren't going to be good for a really long time. I think I could be in that class for a year, and I probably still wouldn't be that great, but I would be a lot better than when I started. And that's its own kind of progress and value, right?
Yes. Well, I'm curious your take on it too, because you've got some perspective from different areas where, it's actually somewhat debated in ballet. I'm with you. I'm with you, but it's actually somewhat debated. There's the school who says you should never try anything, until you're like quote unquote ready for it, until it's going to be perfect. Don't do anything incorrectly first, because you're going to develop like a permanent bad habit if you go in there and you mess it up, and make mistakes. That it's going to be like permanent bad habits that you're going to be developing. I'm curious what your take is there on that sort of like be perfect before you try mentality.
Well, it's funny because I really like floor bar too. And the whole part about floor bar is like do this for 2 years before you're even allowed to stand up. And I don't think I would do well in that sort of system either. I think I would get bored really fast and quit. But I like it in the sense that it's easier to sort of think about your alignment and those sort of habit forming things while you're lying on the floor than it is. So I see my floor bar time as my like clean up all those basics, or try and clean up all those basics time. And then I try and see class time as just do what you can do with whatever you've got.
Yep.
Include especially things like advanced class, like show up, see what you can do. And sometimes I surprise myself, like in artistry class today, I could balance for a little bit on demi pointe and arabesque. That's a huge progress thing for me. Like I
Yeah.
could not have done that a year ago, and I would have laughed at you if you told me I could do that just randomly on a Friday. So I can see the little bits of progress, but I think part of it is building strength, even if it doesn't look real pretty, in classes, for me at least, in classes that are maybe harder than what you feel comfortable with. Also, if I only did what I was comfortable with, I would still be standing at the bar doing tendus en croix and nothing else. So
Yes.
you have to, I think for me, being confused and expanding your horizons and having a challenge, but being okay with not being great at something for maybe a long time is a super important part of the learning process. It's like when I teach, because I teach textiles sometimes. I have students who say, "Well, I don't know what this is going to look like." And I said, "Well, do it. And if you don't like it, you can take the thread out. No one else ever has to see it." And I have some students who are like, "Oh my gosh, yeah, that's great." And they try it 3 times. And I have some students who sit there for the rest of the class and never come back because they can't deal with that idea of just trying something and having it not look good, and then having it not be sort of almost this permanent mistake. Even though in sewing, you can take it out, you can cover it with something else. It's fine. I do it all the time for my pieces. You don't like something, pull it out, design something else for that area that you like better, right? But some students, like some people's brains won't do it. And I really struggle teaching those students because my learning is so different. I don't know what to tell them. I keep saying, "Don't be scared, just do it." And some people, their brains don't do it. And I have a hard time understanding that sometimes when I'm teaching people. I don't know the workaround for that.
I think what you described there, that, the one who you tell them you have to do it imperfectly before you can do it perfect. That's the same drop off point that I think I was trying to get at around 9 months in ballet, where it's like the person it should take a challenge, but that next challenge is going to cause them to be bad again. And they just got good. And then, or like they just felt
Right.
better. Like they just started feeling more comfortable. And that challenge is going to make them feel bad again, or like feel uncomfortable, or feel like they don't know what's going on again. So like that same exact idea is like the same drop off point where like, okay, it's time to go graduate from tendus en croix. Like, let's add the arm, let's add the head. And like, oh no, but I messed everything up. And it's like, yeah, but you're gonna mess it up. And it's probably not gonna be permanent, because it's actually really hard to make habits permanent. So it's probably not going to be permanent after one time of messing it up, because it would be lucky if it was that easy to make a permanent habit.
Yeah, I wish it was, but I do feel like I mean, I think art is like this too. Trying things that are scary is valuable, because then the things that are normal, like the tendus en croix, they all go better because your brain is not panicking through them the
Yeah.
way it would be if you'd never tried the harder thing. Then your brain is like, oh, well, I panicked through this scary thing for an hour last week and I survived. So I can do this thing I know how to do, and I can do it better.
I'm not sure what the workaround is for the people who, like you said, are stuck because of their fear. I mean, I spend a lot of time, my whole life, basically trying to figure out the workaround for these people, because as adults, I think the main reason why people quit is that they get stuck somewhere and they feel like they can't continue. And the gap is that they're afraid of the thing that they're supposed to be trying next. And then that getting people to bridge
Right.
that gap is like necessary to get them to stay in ballet. I mean, of course, if you decide you don't like ballet anymore, whatever, that's a different thing. But if you like ballet and you want to do it and you're stuck in that gap, like that gap is just like, I think that is the gap between where you are and where you want to be, is like that stuff you're not willing to try. Like that stuff you're not willing to try. It's like you have to figure out, why are you not willing to try this? What's the worst that's going to happen? And then sometimes they have a reason. Okay, what's worse than that? Okay, then what? And then what? And usually if you ask people, and then what, like 4 times, you get to the root of the problem, and then you can help them. So it's like, what's the worst that'll happen? They tell you it'll look bad. Okay, and then what? I'll feel bad. Okay, and then what? My partner will leave me. Okay, and then what? And then I'll have my own house. So it's like you
Right.
take it down this rabbit hole, and it's like, and then you get to the root of the problem, and it's like, okay, well, and then what? And then eventually they stop, and then they're like, okay, well, fine, I'll do it.
And you don't really know what the outcome something will be if you try. This reminds me, I ran into a painter I know in town the other day, and they sold a really expensive painting. And he was talking to me. He was like, I was going to repaint that canvas. I hated it. It was terrible. And then this woman came in and bought it for $1,100. And she loved it. And
Oh,
it was her dream painting. And I hated it. Like, I was going to throw it out. I was going to repaint it. But this woman came in and she bought it and I sold it. Can you believe it? I was like, well, that means it wasn't really bad, right? It just, like, she saw something that even you didn't see. Your clearly, if she was willing to pay that, your judgment of it being bad isn't really factually correct, right? You didn't sell a bad painting. You sold a good painting to someone who appreciated it that you just didn't see in the same way. So I think even this idea of like bad and good is so subjective
mhm.
in some ways. Like, that's what that really taught me. I was like, but you didn't make a bad painting, you know?
It was good for that
This
lady.
proves it. Right.
Yeah.
Like, this proves it factually. You did not make a bad painting. You just made a painting that maybe wasn't perfect for you, but it was perfect for her.
Or maybe she likes bad paintings because it's a fun story to tell at a party. And maybe it is a bad painting. And we don't know, though. The thing is, we don't know. The thing is, you can make up any story you want, because none of you don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really interesting that for whatever reason it had objective value
Yeah.
to the buyer, but the artist was like, whatever, like, I hated it. So I think I think we're all too hard on ourselves. But
Yes.
B, even
Amen.
something that isn't perfect or great still has value
Yes.
and worth. And it's not so simple as like, did I do badly in class? Did I do well in class? Like, there's always some gray area. And even if you have a terrible class, there's always something you did better than you did the previous week.
The fact that you showed up is another win, because you could have not. And so you can take it all the way down to the bottom of there.
Right. Or even if your technique was terrible, but you followed all the combinations. That's a
Yep.
win. For
Right.
me, that's a win. I'm very directionally challenged.
Right. And it's like, if for you, that's your main skill you need to learn, then keeping up with the combination is like, that's the win. And then the technique will fill in the blanks when it can. But if you are off the direction, that's your first skill you have to learn. That's it. That's the first skill you have to learn. No other skill can develop until you have that one, because you'll always feel too confused to absorb the rest.
Right. But if I don't do classes where I'm confused, my legs don't and my arms don't learn where to go and how to switch directions. And they're never going to learn if I don't try and make them do it
Right.
faster and, in more complicated patterns.
Right. It's funny with thinking about this, thinking about art, I think obviously with the adult ballet festival, I encourage beginners to go on stage and to perform. Right. And I did, as a singer, perform as a beginner. And I think people worry that their piece is going to be bad, right? That they're going to be bad. Like it's going to be, well, I'm a bad dancer. So what should I do on stage? And it's interesting to me because the feedback I always receive after the show is like how inspiring those dancers were on stage, and how many more people I know of have started ballet because they've watched some of our festival versus watching professionals, because it feels attainable and it's exactly what that person needed to see to show them that they too could get up on that stage and put themselves out there. And it's like, you do not need to be perfect to offer somebody else the value that they need in that moment in time.
Well, I think that's one of the reasons, again, I love your videos because you are someone who started as an adult and you are a really good dancer, but your dancing is something, or at least I look at it and I think if I worked really hard, I could achieve this level of adult starter of dancing.
Right.
And I follow a lot of professional teachers and teachers who were professional ballerinas, like Catherine Morgan. I love her classes. I'm never going to dance like her. If I work at this for 40 years, it is not possible for
Right.
me. And so, in some ways, if you look at that, it's always going to be discouraging. So, I think having teachers who are good dancers, but who started as adults, and like in class, you're demonstrating a really high level of adult learning, but an achievable one to people, which is really inspiring.
Right.
It's not like I'm never going to be this person because they were a prima ballerina
Right.
and I'll never, my body just won't do that. I think, especially for adult learners, seeing this high level of adult dance is really important.
And it's different, like you said, than the best of the best. Like the cream of the crop is so fun to watch, but it doesn't necessarily inspire you to do it yourself, because it's just like looking at something so beautiful and that they've worked so hard to have, and you've already missed that boat if you got to this point. Like you've already
Right.
missed it. So it's fun to watch and to look at, and maybe to aspire to, as you can kind of see what perfect is meant to look like one day. But like, as far as what you're inspired to achieve, it's not necessary. I mean, for some maybe, but for many, I think it's not as inspiring as like even adults watching each other's beginner adult ballet accounts. They find to be very inspiring, where they can see like, oh, that's what a beginner pirouette looks like, or oh, I have the same problem, or oh, I had that too, and I see you got over it. Like you can see how the learning process actually goes, and I think there's a lot of value in that.
Yeah, I think the adult ballet community on Instagram is really great, especially because lately I've seen more people posting. I wish I remember who it was, but someone posted exactly how many classes it took her to learn to do a good pirouette. And it was like, I don't know, 35.
I would say I think it took me 4 years to do one.
So,
Pretty
but it
slow.
was a
I'm
lot
not
of
a
time.
spinner.
Yeah. And she had, recorded all
Yeah.
of the attempts. And I was like, that is so motivating. Like, I
Yep.
just got to go
Just gotta go.
to class and you got to go and it will happen.
Right.
Eventually, you just can't quit in the middle of that time period.
You have to be bad through that whole thing. Like you
Right.
have to be willing to be bad for like a few years.
But
And
I think a lot of people are not uncomfortable to kind of sit in that idea
yeah,
that they won't be an expert in something immediately, because I think as adults we're all taught that we should be as expert as we can all the time at work and
right.
sometimes at home, and I think people turn that into, well, if I'm not an expert yet, or if I'm not like a naturally gifted person in this thing but I really enjoy it, I shouldn't do it. Like, this is a waste of time. Or even like in my life, because I don't know anyone else who does ballet, in my real life.
Yep.
And my friends are nice about it, but I think they all think I'm a little crazy that I spend so much time on this. Or even my mom the other day was like, why are you spending so much time on this? Like, you're never
Mm.
going to be a professional dancer. Like, don't you have other things to do with your life? And I think it's hard when you hear that kind of feedback And you're like, oh, well, yeah, I guess I'm not any good anyway. So why am I going to do this? It all compounds. I think when you have a hobby that's a little different, and I think ballet is not kind of a normal hobby for a lot of adults, right?
Right.
Or people say, oh, well, isn't that for 12-year-olds?
Right.
Right? Like, why are you doing this? You're 38, isn't that for 12-year-olds? Why are you spending so much time on this? And I think so. It's not, like if we were all running a marathon, we would all get a lot better feedback in our lives, I think, than if we were going to dance class.
Yep.
So I think that all compounds when people are like, well, I'm bad at it. And like, this is, just a stupid pink child thing. Why am I doing it? So I think it's hard. It's hard to carve out the time. It's hard to commit to it and not really care if people think you're nuts.
So why do you spend so much time on it?
Because I really like it. I saw, again, I wish I remembered the account, but someone said that their dance was like cathartic exercise. And
Mhm.
I think that's why I do it. Like, I find it relaxing. I find it's like my brain break, just getting to focus on a lot of little things. And a while into it, I discovered I had goals. I really wanted to be on point. I really wanted to be someone who could feel like I was dancing and not just listening to you yell at me and putting my leg in the right place, right? Like, there's a difference between those two.
Yeah.
And I wanted to, at least at some level, feel like someone who really felt like they were dancing and could enjoy the experience of dancing and hopefully one day do it in point shoes.
Mhm.
That really became something that started driving me on sort of the opposite ends of the spectrum, I guess.
Mhm. It's so funny how it's exercise. Like if you were to go to the gym half an hour a day for 5 days a week, people would be like, wow, that's so good for you. Like you're so healthy.
Right.
Congratulations. And you spend 30 minutes, 5 days a week on ballet. And they're like, why are you wasting your time on that? It's for kids.
Right. Well, it's funny. And now when someone says it to me, like when we're in a group, my husband's like, she can kick you really hard. You don't know.
That's funny.
She has a lot of core strength.
She's got a mean frappe.
Yeah. He was like, she has a lot of core strength now. She can kick you if you're mean about ballet.
So did people say that about your art before you went professional? And then do you
Oh,
get
yes.
okay, but then did they stop saying it once you went professional?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Like, when I made this first textile float, everybody was like, it's so ridiculous. It's so weird. No one's going to buy it. Like, why did you spend all this time on it? It's stupid. It's going to cost so much to get it framed. And now that they've been in a bunch of magazine articles and they've sold a bunch of, they've been in galleries, everyone's like, oh, I knew they were genius all along. Like, no, you didn't.
Nope, you were one of the haters.
Right. Like, I'm like, no, you didn't. You thought it was dumb too. Come on.
Yeah.
But now that I'm a professional with a resume behind me and media stuff, people have sort of changed their tune on it. But I can't go that route with ballet because I'll never be good enough. So I think I'll just have to live with it.
Well, life is long and winding, and so never say never. But I think it's funny, like the saying, like everyone thinks you're crazy until you make it, and then they say, "I knew it all along." It's like it's a thing. It's a thing. I mean, it happened to me in my own endeavors too. Like you go from an actual, quote unquote real job to being a dance teacher, and everyone's like, "Why did you give that up? Why would you give that up for this thing?" And it's like because why
I'm
wouldn't I?
sure everyone thought you were weird because you wanted to focus on teaching adults too.
Oh yeah, like
I'm
kids make
sure that
you'll make
people
more
thought you were
money.
weird.
Yeah, you'll make more money if you teach kids, or like everyone teaches kids, or how many adults really want to learn that, or how many adults are really out there who want to learn this. I'm like, I don't know. I was there, so I feel like there's got to be more because I was pretty obsessed. So there's got to be more. If not, I mean, I guess like when I opened my studios, I was like, I had a job and I could, pay the rent for the studio on my salary. So I was like, if anything, I've just got myself a place to practice. So if this whole thing doesn't go well, then I have a year-long lease and I have a practice studio for a year. So hopefully I have students, but if not, like I have a place to practice and to dance. And I think that's like you were saying with your art. It's like when you do it for yourself, like for some reason people can like tell that it was genuine and then want in.
Right. Like if I make something that I just want to put up in my house, it sells. And so I've just kind of given up like making the stuff I think I should make because it doesn't make any sense to me and it doesn't monetize. So, there's no point in having it sitting around in inventory forever.
I guess if you want it in your house, then at least one person wants it in their house. But if you make what you think you should make, at least zero people want it in their house. So it's not even like there's no guarantee.
Right, exactly. But I do think doing whatever you're passionate about is always worth it. But I do think, again, I think we live in a society where doing something you're passionate about sort of marks you as a weirdo in some ways as an adult if you're spending a lot of time on it, whether it's ballet or whatever.
Yep.
So I think, but one of the things I like about, again, things like Instagram or the message board that you run, now there's a community of like minded weirdos that you can be friends with. Like my friend who sent me all the pre-point reminders, I met her through Broche, but via Instagram,
Oh, that's so funny.
through the various Broche hashtags. And now we
Yep.
text each other every day
That's
and
awesome.
we're really good friends. So I think part of what's nice about maybe jujitsu and singing are the same way. You can find like-minded weirdos to hang out with, which makes the whole thing, even if you're just dancing in your house or whatever, it makes the whole thing less isolating.
Yeah. Well, and I think it can even be isolating if you're dancing in a studio, like, especially with something like ballet where it's meant to be quiet. It's like very quiet in the room. You don't get to know the other people necessarily through the class. You can be taking the class with the same people and never know their name, never even like say hello to the people that you see every single week. So I think it can be isolating even in the studio too, not just at home. I mean, there's obviously it's changing. There's more and more studios that have a little bit more welcoming of an environment, but like ballet in general is not known for like the warm and fuzzies and being able to meet like-minded people and whatnot.
Yeah. I think the online thing helps with that. And in fact, so at least for me, the online thing has been important. So I'm plus size. Y'all can't see me because it's a recorded podcast. I'm plus size. I would never go to a normal dance studio. I would be really freaked out. I would assume that my size would be a problem. And a lot of places it would be.
You'd hope not, but
Like a lot of places, I think it still would be. You
mm,
don't know, but I mean,
yeah.
not that there's any dance studios. I live on an island of 800 people, but
Oh, I didn't
not
know
that,
that.
no, we moved an island of 800 people. It's really beautiful. It's really quiet. But for me, my closest dance studio would be Washington, D.C., which is 2.5 hours away.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just not possible. But part of what made me so uncomfortable when I danced when I was younger, I'm sure you've heard this from lots of people, is I was really curvy and I didn't look like everyone else. And I got made really uncomfortable
Mm-hmm.
for a long period of time. And it just did not seem worth it. I think a lot of people don't want to step back into a studio and risk replicating that
Yeah.
feeling all over again as adults. And so I think programs like yours that are, body positive and just accept everybody where they are really making people feel comfortable investing in dance as a hobby.
You'd hope that I mean, it's like you always just hope that things are changing, but ballet is a slow one to change. So it's you still hear stories of people going to studios where it's meant to be for adults and they're treated the way that you would expect from kind of an old school type of environment. Um, I think it'll continue changing. I think with the masses of us who are accruing on the internet throughout the various, adult programs and stuff are going to be a big force of the change that takes place. And it'll change. But in the meantime, we're in that messy part that we've been talking about throughout this whole podcast. We're in that messy part right now where it's like a little confusing and a little bit imperfect and like in transition. And we just have to stick with it through that period of time because it's on its way to the next phase. It's just in this kind of like
Yeah.
middle range.
I think ballet in 10 years is going to be really different in terms of what it accepts in the studio and what it doesn't. I agree. Now is kind of that weird middle ground
Yep.
where it's all mixed. But I think in 10 years, I really do think it's going to be different.
Yes.
Maybe, I hope on a professional level too, to some degree. But hopefully it's going to be a healthier, happier place for everybody.
It all signs point towards yes, at least in growing pockets, in growing pockets around the world and the country. At least I think.
Yeah, I agree.
Um, this was such a fun conversation, Holly. Do you have any more points you want to make sure that you cover before we wrap up the conversation?
No, I just think everyone should come to advanced class and flail around once a week and learn something.
come be confused. If you think you'll be the only one confused, Holly is self-reported confused. And
Yes, that
that
is my pitch. I'm directionally confused and not up to it. So if you come, you're guaranteed to be better than me. And it's good for your brain.
Well, now you have a little bit of a head start, Holly, because you have been coming and practicing for quite some time now. So you have like a bit of a head start. You could pretty much end up in the right corner almost every time these days.
That's true.
So
mostly,
yeah, like
if I've had enough coffee.
Yeah, you pretty much end up in the right place with the right foot in front every time now. Like you really have learned. It's been about a year since you've been about a year, I think, since you've been trying these classes, and you pretty much always end up in the right spot.
It took a long time.
Come and flail, and in a year, you'll be in the right spot.
Yes. I think that's a good lesson.
I think it's a life lesson right there. Awesome. Holly, where can people check out your art? Do you want to add any info for them to check it out?
Oh yeah. So at Instagram, I'm flossing in the moonlight, FLOSSING. If you are not an embroidery person, embroidery thread is called embroidery floss if you're an American. And whenever anyone from the UK emails me now, they go, "Oh, I know you're American."
What do they call it?
They just call it embroidery thread.
Thread.
They don't call it yeah, they just
doing
everything's thread. It's weird.
That's funny. I'm not an embroiderer. I do cross stitching, but I use embroidery floss for my cross stitching, but that's because
you're American.
So now I know if I go over there, I need to change up my language or else sound like an American. Yes, check out.
Thank you for having me. This was great.
Thanks so much for being here, Holly. Very fun conversation. Super fun. All right, dancers, that was the episode with Holly. I hope you had a lot of fun, and I hope you're ready to get out there and muck around until you feel like you've got the hang of things. Isn't she just a delight in reminding us all that it's okay to be imperfect, to enjoy the process, and enjoy your time outside of your comfort zone? As I mentioned at the top of the episode, Holly did manage to get on point using my Journey to Point program. If you too would like to get on point as an adult ballet dancer, visit journey2point.com and check out my whole program for how I help adults just like you get their very first pair of pointe shoes. All right, dancers, I'm going to be back in your ear next week with another super awesome episode. And until next time, I wish you very happy dancing.